Welcome today to Side Hustles and Small Businesses. This is the second webinar of our 2022-2023 academic year of Get Savvy, Grow Your Green Stuff webinar series. So, we're going to be talking about obviously side hustles and small businesses. And I want to introduce myself and my colleague Steve. So, my name is Andrea Pellegrini. I run the University of Illinois Systems Student Money Management Center for all three of the universities. So, I pre-pandemic, I would travel quite frequently from Urbana to Chicago to Springfield to support students at each one of those locations. And my colleague Steve, who does not work at IDFPR, but in fact works at UIC, I will fix those slides before we send them out. I'm going to have him introduce himself.
Sure. I'm Steve. Thank you very much, Andrea, for inviting me to be here. And I've been at the college at the University of Illinois at Chicago for just about 8 years. I've been supporting small businesses for over 20, both as a consultant and as a teacher. And I also spent a couple of years working at a credit union. So I've seen kind of both sides of small businesses as they get established and grow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve, for being our subject matter expert today. I'll be supporting Steve in his efforts to educate all of us on small businesses. So, I would like to again state that collectively, the Get Savvy team represents organizations across the state of Illinois, which rests on the land of multiple Native nations. We'd like to begin today by recognizing and acknowledging that these organizers uh, have locations on these ancestral lands, and they include um, the ancestral lands of the Peoria, the Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. And we have a responsibility to acknowledge these Native nations and to work with them as we move forward as a vibrant and inclusive society. All right, so we would like you to put in what state and or county you are logging in from today in that chat. I talked a lot about where to find the chat before we started the recording today, but if you can just let us know in what state or county you're logging in from. We got Kankakee, Boone, Champaign, someone from Arizona, DuPage, someone from state of Washington. We really like it when our colleagues and friends from across the nation show up on our webinars as well. New York, some Cook County folks, Champaign County folks. All right, Louisiana, fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, generally, we're going to be talking today about entrepreneurship and our economy. We're going to explore some personal finance concepts as it relates to business. We're also going to be talking about the different traits of entrepreneurs that might be beneficial to know about and to consider for your own traits before jumping into small business. We're going to review some important aspects of starting a business, and we're going to provide some resources to address some next steps and common questions related to starting a business. All
So,
right.
we wanted to start by talking a little bit about how entrepreneurship fits in the economy, and just to give a little background about that because it really is an important part of our economy. Slide. Before we get started, just to get a little sense of who's in our audience, we have a poll question, I believe. So, a couple of options here. Do you work for a business or a company that has less than 20 employees, 20 to 500, more than 500? Maybe you're self employed, or maybe you're retired, or maybe other. So, we're just going to give a couple of minutes here for this, probably about 45 more seconds, and then we'll wrap this one up. It's always interesting to see the variety of people who attend these workshops and their experience in working with different types of organizations.
It looks
So,
like the responsive is kind of stabilized. So let's share the results real
cool.
quick.
Are you sharing it?
Yes, can you see
Okay.
it? I'm not sure if you can see it, Steve, since you're a co-host,
Okay, yeah.
but
So go
do you
ahead.
want me to name off some of the responses?
Yeah, go for it.
About 7% of responses are from businesses with less than 20 employees, 26 from mid-sized companies, those with 20 to 500 employees. Uh, about half are from institutions or organizations with more than 500 employees. We have 4% self-employed and 11% other. I'm assuming that's a lot of students.
Cool. So a good variety here. Uh, we also had a question for the chat. Can we flip the slide here? Um, have you ever worked for a small business with less than 20 employees? So maybe currently you're working for a larger one, but in the chat, maybe just a yes, no. Have you ever worked for a small business? Starting to see a mix. Lots of people have. So that's good. Working for a small business is really important to the economy. And so let's look at some of those statistics that we have here. Uh, so there are, depending on the exact time and when the numbers were produced, there are somewhere around 30 million small businesses in the United States. And a large percentage of them, again, depending on the statistic in the year, the 98, 97% have fewer than 20 employees. There's a large group of employers or businesses, we say, that don't have employees that are one person operations but list income as from business on their taxes. The Small Business Administration, the federal agency which supports small businesses, defines small businesses as having less than 500 employees. And uh, so sometimes we've chosen to use 20 for kind of our number that we're talking about, but um, certainly there's a real mix. And then statistically, there's a lot of evidence that small businesses are the job creators in the economy. There was an estimate done a number of years ago that between 1993 and 2016, almost 62% of all net new jobs were created in small businesses. So, small businesses are a big part of our employment situation. Here's a slide with just a map to show us where what states have a higher percentage of small businesses in them, and so I think it looks to me like Illinois is kind of in the middle of the range there. No, next slide, please. Um, Although some states around us have higher percentage of small business employment, some have a little bit less, but it is pretty common that many people do work for small businesses. Next slide. So, the gig economy and self employment. There have been some various studies done over the last couple of years. The gig economy is certainly growing and is getting to be an important part of our economy. There was a study a couple of years ago that said over a quarter of workers participate in the gig economy. Some of them do it full time, some of them do it part time here and there. The IRS reports that the number of taxpayers who are earning self employment income has increased significantly since 2012. And in general, although it's not exclusive, younger people do tend to be more active in the gig economy. Uh, but that's not to say that people of all ages don't get involved in the gig economy and self employment. So, uh, small business really does drive innovation. There have been some various statistics. One of them around the innovation piece is the size of the businesses that apply for patents. Much more common for a small business to apply for a patent, although big businesses do drive that process as well. Uh, Exports, money, statistically, many of the exports are sold by companies that are small employers. Uh, there's this perception out there sometimes that small businesses are very risky and that they don't survive. Certainly, I think that the planning process is important, and that's one of the things we'll talk about in a few minutes. But there's been some statistics out there that half of the businesses that are started survive 5 years or longer, and that a third of them are still in business in 10 years. And not every business that closes is a failure. Sometimes people find new opportunities. Sometimes people sell that business into larger businesses. I actually had somebody talk to me about this yesterday, wanting to set himself up so he was expecting a large business to want to buy him. Hopefully, that will be a very successful closure, but a transaction and the business is what it's doing will still survive. Um, Other times, people are at retirement age and are trying to get out, and so they don't consider it a failure. It's just it's time for them to make a change. So there are lots of reasons why small businesses change hands over the time.
Thank you so much, Steve. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and side hustles and income and personal finances kind of generally. So, I want you to use that chat again and let us know if you have ever worked a contract or gig job. So, gig jobs can include like driving for Uber or Lyft, or you might be doing delivery work or grocery work. We got some no's, we got some yeses, some more no's, a lot of no's, but keep those answers coming. I'm going to move kind of quickly, but there's a few that have participated, so that's good to know. So, one thing that I want to talk about when it comes to small businesses and gig work in general, especially if you do it kind of exclusively, is income volatility. And it's defined in many different ways, depending on the source that you're looking at, the type of research being done on it. But it typically refers to this fluctuation in income over a specified period of time. Most studies look at a increase or decrease of 25% or more in annual income year over year. But when you think about low income individuals or gig workers, even small changes in income, even maybe 10% change in income from a week to week basis, can be pretty significant. So there are some ways to try to protect against income volatility risk that we're going to talk about. So there's obviously, from the perspective of small business and gig work, income diversification. There are different ways to earn income. Um, from a protecting against financial risk, kind of generally, looking at your insurance and risk management options is really important. And then from a small business perspective, the way that you set up your legal structure, be it like, for instance, a limited liability company like an LLC, might be another way to help protect yourself against risk. So, when it comes to income diversification, let's just take an example that John Acuff provided, who's a um, public speaker and educator and author, about different ways that creatives can make a living through these different income streams. So, you might write books as a creative author or writer, you might do public speaking. You might do some freelance work, which is along with gig work or gig economy. Um, you might produce or run or teach online courses or create self paced courses that you sell. You might have retainer clients. You might have calendar sales. You might have affiliate business relationships where you get kickbacks from. Sometimes this is common with social media managers or content creators. You might have subscriptions, like if you are a content creator, you might have a Patreon. But is there anything on this list, let's say if anyone that is a creative might think should be added to this from an income diversification? Is there anything not listed here that might help a creative earn income? If you can put that in the chat, that'd be helpful. I know we made a long list, so it's kind of hard to think about what might not be on here. All right. Well, you keep thinking about that. And if you do think of something, let us know in the chat. But generally, the more income streams that you can put together at even any given time, if one of those streams or multiple of those streams kind of disappear or have significant fluctuations, you can rely on a different income stream. So that is why having multiple income streams or income diversification can really help you. We'll talk about investment diversification in February when we have our investment webinar, and it's a similar concept. So you might want to put that on your schedule if you're interested in investment diversification. All right. So from
Some
an
people put some interesting things in the chat, Andrea.
oh, I see now.
Yep. Room rentals in a home or selling arts and craft, other services. So, yeah, there's some other good ideas here.
These are great ideas. Thank you so much. All right, keep them coming. Everybody's here to learn. That's why we have the chat, right? Share our knowledge. All right, so let's talk a little bit about insurance. So you want to, even from a personal perspective, not just from a business perspective, when it comes to insurance as a tool to manage your risks, you want to assess what you already have, maybe assess your auto insurance, your homeowners or renters insurance. You may need to get additional types of insurance that may not be common from a personal perspective if you own a business or do gig work. For instance, you might need cyber insurance, which protects your business in case of a cyber attack or data breach. If you hold, I want to say student, not student, customer data, uh, especially online, it's important to have that kind of uh, risk to protect yourself against the business liability that's there. And then there's also business and product liability insurance that might be helpful to have. So once you kind of assess what you currently have going on, you might look at what your liabilities are, and you could do this in an opposite way, right? You could look at your liabilities first, then assess what you currently have, and then identify what your gaps are. For instance, if you currently have auto insurance that is just the bare minimum in Illinois, that might not be enough to cover the cost of you getting into an accident if you are doing a delivery as part of your gig work. It may not be covered at all, for instance. So you might look at commercial business auto insurance for your side gig as a delivery worker, especially if you are using personal assets to do business work, determining that liability and the gaps between what you have personally in insurance and what you need as a self employed or um, business owner individual would be really helpful. For maybe, for example, you sell arts and crafts and you keep inventory in your home, making sure that that is covered under your homeowner's insurance or your renter's insurance, or to see if you need an additional type of insurance or an additional rider added to your existing insurance policy might be something that will help protect you against risk in the future.
Can I just add a quick story for that?
Absolutely, Steve.
Sure. So, and no, I don't know of anybody of this happening, but it's something to think about. Sometimes you hear about an apartment fire. Well, what if the next door neighbor's apartment isn't damaged, but the building is considered unsafe, and so you no longer can get into your apartment, and you had business inventory in there? My guess is that most renters insurance policy is not going to cover your inventory. So, if you only have a couple $100s, maybe that's a risk you're willing to take, but maybe you just got in a shipment of new inventory. And so you have $1,000 or $2,000 worth of inventory in that. So it's something to be aware of.
That is a very good story. Very good thing to think about. Thank you, Steve. So, from a legal structure perspective, and Steve is going to talk about legal structures a little bit more when he talks about the business planning perspective. And an LLC is one legal structure that some people may choose, and the top two reasons that they may choose to do a LLC or a limited liability company is because of taxes or liability. So you may need to consult with other specialists or professionals. There's three main types to guide your decision. You might want to talk to a lawyer, You might want to talk to an accountant or CPA specifically. You might want to talk to an insurance broker about your insurance needs, which we just talked about. And the reason why you might want to talk to a broker instead of an agent is because they'll probably have more options for getting you the insurance that you need than if you speak to just an agent, because brokers can kind of go anywhere to get you the insurance they need, whereas an agent is tied to a specific company or firm. So that's something to keep in mind when you are consulting. And they're going to have most likely different opinions and suggestions. So you'll kind of need to decide what's relevant or important to your specific situation. And that might change. So you might need to consult these people multiple times, right? But it's like, I think that Steve has already made apparent. That's why the planning process is so important. So you can kind of assess what the changing landscape might be, and you don't have to make those kind of changes on the fly. And some things won't be able to be changed once you set them in place. So it's important that you have these things figured out and you have people identified to help you figure out your structure. From a finances perspective, there's some things I want to highlight. Personal finance in general is a lot more complicated than we give it credit for, but there are some specific things that we want to think about when it comes to balancing the finances of a business alongside the finances of your personal life, right? So, savings is one thing that you want to think about. In general, it's good to have emergency funds as an individual, right? But you may be using savings for your startup capital for a small business. So getting in the savings habit now while you're in the planning process or in the idea process can really help you when it comes to getting started and also kind of navigating fluctuations like income volatility when your business starts rolling as well. Budgeting is very important when it comes to a business plan, and it's also important to recognize understanding what the individual needs you have, like to pay yourself from the business revenue or income that you may be generating. Though, so you'll probably have to create multiple types of budgets to help you figure out what you'll need to survive, as well as what you need to make sure that your business is successful from a financial perspective. Depending on how you set up your legal structure, and generally, if you set up a limited liability company, you want to have separate funds, and that includes separate accounts for your business versus your personal funds. So, Steve shared with me yesterday as we were talking about this that if you do set up an LLC, you must separate the finances because if you are setting up an LLC, it's its own business entity, and you must follow through with the financials on a day to day basis and make sure that those are separated and you're not muddying the waters between your personal funds and your business funds. And the more clear that your finances can be, the more separate they can be on paper, the more helpful it is. Um, Especially when you go to engage in financial transactions with other businesses. So when it comes to financing and lending, when you borrow money for your business, it it typically does not benefit the owner of the business, but it does come back to being a personal liability for the owner of the business. For instance, lenders will often require personal guarantees along with business signatures on a lot of loan paperwork to make sure that whatever business loan debt that you're taking out is going to be covered. So you may not get the benefit on your personal credit history for providing that personal guarantee on a loan document for your business, but you will be accepting the personal risk. So keep that in mind from a lending perspective. And so if you think about that, it also means that your personal credit worthiness can impact whether or not you get a business loan. So there's kind of this misnomer that if you set up your legal structure to be a limited liability company or completely separate from your personal um, life, right? You're limiting your liability. That doesn't necessarily mean that your financial history is going to be completely separated from it. It's a strange situation, but that means that if you don't already have good credit or you aren't working towards good credit, it's a good idea to start working on that now as well. All right, so just some things to think about for credit worthiness. If you have poor credit, it can impact your ability to get leases, your ability to get insurance, and the rate that you are paying for the insurance is going to impact the cost of loans. It can impact the rates on business credit cards, and it can probably impact a lot of other things. It depends on the industry you're working in, the state you're working in, a lot of different things. But those are some things that we wanted you to keep in mind. We're going to be talking about how to build credit to your advantage in 2 weeks on November 9th. So, my colleague Kathy and my other colleague Kamaya, Kathy's in the chat if you want to say hi to her, are going to be co-presenting this particular webinar. So if you haven't signed up and you want to, we're going to put that chat or put that link in the chat. And I'm going to hand it back over. Oh, I'm doing the next section too. Never mind. I'm not going to hand it back over to Steve. But we're going to talk a little bit about the traits and characteristics of entrepreneurs now. All right. So there are some typical traits that are common of entrepreneurs that might be helpful for you to keep in mind. So, from a risk reward perspective, um, not being risky, but being able to analyze the risk and reward balance, and then being confident that you made a good decision, are going to help you be successful. You don't want to be someone that waffles back and forth on a decision when you're trying to run a business. Um, One study actually suggested that entrepreneurs take less risk in their own minds. But I know that we have this idea that most entrepreneurs are not risk averse. They are willing to take on risk, which is it is a risk in some cases. Um, Typically, entrepreneurs have high perseverance. It can be very time consuming. It can take a long time to build a business. Um, and so it's important that you have good perseverance when it comes to that. And you also need to be independent. You need to be comfortable with doing things yourself when it comes to a business. You can't always rely on other people. And sometimes it's a matter of facilitating conversations with others or knowing who to hire if you don't know how to do something, right? We talked about the CPA and the lawyer and the insurance broker, where you're not going to be expected to be licensed in all of those things, right? But you need to be able to make decisions, feel confident in those decisions, persevere when things look a little bit troublesome or you're having some challenges. And you need to be able to be kind of independent as well. And then you also need to be aware of yourself and how you function in order to be successful in any type of business. So that those are important things. I also think just from a professional perspective, it's good to be self-aware, regardless of if you are in small business or if you're an employee somewhere else. And then some skills that you kind of want to keep in mind will be necessary as a small business owner is you kind of have to be good at sales, or you have to be willing to learn how to be a salesperson. Um, and in reality, we're all kind of sellers of certain things. I did a podcast with Steve not too long ago, and he actually joked that I had to sell him on doing the podcast. And he was right. I had to tell him the benefits, I had to explain how it could help him and help me. I've mainly focused on how it would hopefully help him in order to uh, kind of get him to agree with that. And that's the same when you start a business. There are different things that you're going to have to sell. It might be products, it might be services, it might be relationships. So that's something that being comfortable with will be pretty good. And sales aren't always bad. So it's good to think about it from that perspective. You'll also want to be good at forming a network to get outside support and resources. We talked about independence, which is really important. So having independence to, but also finding that support system. Your family might be a good part of that support system. So leveraging that family can really be helpful. Um, you also want to be financially stable and understand risk management like insurance. We talk a lot about insurance because of the different types of risks involved with small business. So being aware of the terminology and knowing the questions to ask when you go seek out advice from an insurance broker can be really helpful. And then your lifestyle is also very important. So you want to make wise decisions that don't let your status as a business owner convince you to live outside of your means. Sometimes it's a status symbol there. So being aware of that, being aware of yourself, like we talked about earlier, and what your tendencies are and how you can keep some of those things in check might be very helpful as well. Um, all right. So just because I am a big interest profile and interest inventory nerd, we're going to put in the chat the ONET interest profiler. This is an interest inventory tool that can help you identify your career interests. People that score heavily on enterprising interests often have kind of an entrepreneurial spirit, but entrepreneurial spirit. That's a very difficult word to say. But there are skills that fall under these other categories that can be helpful for maintaining a business. For instance, if you're realistic, you might enjoy working with plants and animals or real world materials like outside work. For instance, construction contractors might often be self-employed or part of a small business. If you're investigative, you care about facts and figures, which is extremely helpful for organizing your business plan and keeping things on track. If you're artistic, you focus on creativity and you like work that can be done without a lot of rule following, but we all have to follow rules a little bit. But that artistic aspect can be your product or your service. So that can be a really valuable part of uh, your business as well, if that's something that you score high on. The social aspect focuses on teaching or giving advice or serving and helping others. So, depending on the industry that you're in or what you're selling, that might be beneficial to the business that you're trying to start. Enterprising specifically is supposed to be good at persuading and leading people and making decisions and taking risks for profit is what they really are good at. And then people with high interest in conventional enjoy working with clear rules and following a strong leader. So that's just a brief overview, and Ramya put the interest profiler link in the chat. So thank you, Ramya. And I'm going to now hand it back over to Steve to talk about the important aspects of starting a business.
Thank you. So, yes, so let's dig into some things. Before we do that, we have a poll question, I believe. Andrea, are you going to put that up?
Yep, I just too
That's
many
okay.
buttons at once. Right.
So, our poll question, just again, just to kind of get to know the audience, is do you currently own a business that's generating revenue? And I'll just say that we specifically chose the word revenue and not profit because you can be starting and still not be generating a profit, but you're certainly generating revenue. So Some interesting answers here. It's actually of the people who have answered yes or no, it's been going back and forth, but staying around 20, 25%. Some yes, some no. Right now, it's a little bit lower on the yes, a little bit higher on the no, and then there are a bunch of people who are not in business, and that's fine. Hopefully, this will inspire you to think more about it. So we can go ahead and close the poll and move on. Uh, cool. So one of the things that sometimes people bring up about starting a business is what is the timing? When should I do it? My question would really be is why not now, and what would make it a better time? Certainly, there are certain types of business that you do want to think about the timing, and there are some very valid reasons to be concerned about that. But in a lot of cases, one, the reality is, I'll just tell you, having watched a lot of people start businesses, it often takes longer. So even if you say this is the perfect time to do it, it's going to take some time to do that. But also, as I think there's a famous Chinese quote about when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, it was 10 years ago. And with a business, it's probably best to get started as soon as you can. Um, I think that every business owner needs to have a business plan. I think the most important document that a business owner has is their written business plan that talks about what they're doing and what they plan to do and how they plan to do it. Uh, Three reasons that I'm going to throw out there are one, the planning process helps you address the most common issues that others have faced. And the template and there are various templates that you might find to help you through the written planning process. They all ask some questions because other people have thought about these. Other entrepreneurs have realized these are issues, and so it's good to help you think about those questions because there's a lot of very common stuff. It's then adjusted to the unique situation. Uh, it's a way to gain insights on what you don't know. And I used to work with somebody who used to always say, we don't know what we don't know. And at times that used to annoy me so much, but I realized that yes, we have to be aware there's stuff we don't know. And so we need to see how we can figure that out. And again, the planning process helps us to be forced to address some issues that maybe we haven't thought about. And then it's always good to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. And again, the planning process and getting advice and reviewing the plan allows you to talk to people who might have thought about it in a different way, people who might have done it before you in maybe a slightly different industry, but they can share information that can help you. And I can tell you that a lot of times talking with entrepreneurs, the question is, well, what do other people in this industry think about? What do they know? What's their ratio for this percentage on something, or how did they address this issue? And talking to smart people can be really helpful. um, I love this quote. Can we go back 1 minute there? I love this quote from President and General Eisenhower. Plans are worthless, but planning is everything. And I have to say that uh, any good business consultant is going to tell you that what you plan isn't going to happen the way you wanted it to. And that's true. But there really is something about going through that planning process. And I definitely can tell when I talk to people who've taken the time to plan something, they think about things in a different way. There's a difference in the way they see the process. And so I really do believe that it's the planning process that you're going through. Next slide. So people sometimes have said to me, well, what needs to be in a business plan? And I like to tell people that I'm agnostic to what plan you use. I want it to be a plan that works for you. But there are three broad categories that I think every plan has to address. And when I get done reading a plan, occasionally people will ask me to review their plan and give them feedback. If I don't understand the answers to these three areas, to me, that's a concern. So, marketing, I like to think about it as how do you communicate with those people out there who want what you have to sell? And ultimately, it's all about moving people from maybe not knowing about you to knowing what you're doing and to hopefully saying, oh, yes, I'll buy it from you. Then operations is how do you deliver? And so this picture was specifically chosen. Um, it's melted popsicles. And what I like to say to people is you can make the best popsicles, but if you can't keep them cold from the time you make them until the time you deliver them to a customer, they're useless. So, what is involved in your business in answering once the person says yes, what do you have to do to deliver that value to them to make sure that they get what they wanted? And then the financial side of it is looking at what is the revenue, what is the profit, how does the money flow through the business. This is the area that's probably the most structured and the most, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of expectations about how you provide that information. But ultimately, you should be asking, because you're an investor in your business, is this a wise investment in my time and of my money? And outside investors, whether they be investing in your business or lenders, are going to be asking the same thing. Is this business going to be able to pay back this investment, this loan? And so the financial process is the structure to give the information so that that outside person can see. And so you can see, yes, this has a potential to generate what I expect it to. Next slide. Thank you. So I've put together a checklist, and we're going to talk about these, but in the chat, we'll put in the link to this checklist so you can download this. And here's a list of 10 or 11 things that I think that every person needs to be thinking about as they're going through the process, and hopefully things that they need to do before they actually start to sell. So let's talk about a couple of these. So the first two, a feasibility checklist and a business plan with launch. I put these together for a reason, that they really are very similar documents. Sometimes we think about a feasibility checklist as a light version of a business plan. Um, a feasibility checklist often looks at the personal considerations of business ownership. What are your personality traits and desires, and does that make sense with being an owner? And then what are some major weaknesses and challenges or successes or opportunities for this business? Who are some of the major competitors in the industry? What do you know about the industry? And sometimes people come to me and say, I've got these multiple ideas. How do I pick between them? Well, one of the things I often say is, well, let's find a business feasibility checklist. And there's a link to one in the handout, where you can go through and use it to help you decide which idea makes the most sense. Once you've started to put that together, then if you decide that you want to move ahead, then I really think you need to put together a business plan. And I add the words with a launch here. What I think about is that a lot of times what's in the business plan is those operational things that you're going to do on an ongoing basis. And sometimes there are some things that you'll do a little bit differently at the beginning, especially to communicate that you're a new business and to let people know what they need to know so that they can start to connect with you. Again, that business plan really has to address those three areas: marketing, operations, and finance. And I always step back. I'm often amazed at how many people will say that, yes, they have a business plan, and one, admit that it's not in writing, or they'll give me a document and will be missing one of these sections. And really, it does need to have all three of those sections there. Next slide, please. So, after you've decided that you're going to move forward on the business, at some point you're going to have to make a decision about the legal structure of the business. So, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Andrea mentioned a couple things, but the structure really is about your personal liability. What would happen if something bad happened and someone sued the business? And so the different structures have different risks and rewards around that. And then how does the business pay taxes? And the different forms have have different impacts on taxes. And so sometimes people are very concerned about the tax side of this, or sometimes people are very concerned about the personal liability. A number of years ago, I had a lady come to me who said, I just got divorced and I want to make sure that my ex doesn't get a hold of my business. Well, that's going to be a different discussion about the structure than someone who's maybe a college student who doesn't have a lot to risk and doesn't care about making sure that no one else can um, gain something from their business if they're not part of the business. So do have those conversations with the accountants and the lawyers and the insurance person to make sure that you make the right decision based on your situation. One of the things is, often people are a little concerned, oh, if I make the wrong decision here, I can't change it. Like everything in life, there is a way to change it. It just does have some complications. And so it's worth taking the time to make a wise decision about this. Um, Unfortunately, can we go back 1 second there? Thank you. There's no standard way that you register each of these forms of business. Each one has its own nuances, and so it's not real complicated. But I can't just say then once you picked it, then you go through this process because there is a little bit of nuances for the different ways of registering it. But it's not super complicated, and I know you can figure that one out with good advisors. So the next thing, um, every business has intellectual property and information that they need to protect. Now, often lawyers talk to us about the 4 types of intellectual property: patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets. And those are the very formalized structures that you need to protect business information that can be covered by those types of protections. But they are different, they each have their different usage, and you'll need to do a little bit of work on understanding those. And especially the patents and even the trademarks can involve some money. And so you really need to think through what the right process about that is. But there's also information that maybe isn't of the nature that you would choose to patent or trademark it, but you still have information. So Andrea mentioned cybersecurity issues earlier. And if you have client information, especially if you have financial information on your clients or maybe personally identifying information, you need to have a process for how you're going to protect that. So, beyond just the legal types of protection, you need to really make sure that you have a process. And a number of years ago, in 1 year, I had like 3 clients who all had computer hard drives go belly up on them. And it wasn't something like someone stole the computers, it was just they had issues. And it was good that they had some backup of information, but I would really encourage you to make sure that you've thought through that and have a process. Certainly, if I work with a client, I often have old copies of documents, but it is never like having to go back and dig through that. And it's just you should have a process for protecting your information. Another thing that you'll need to address, and there are some issues based on different legal structure, but in general, you're going to have to take some responsibility to handle the taxes for the business. And then if you have employees, around the employees, and there could be other tax issues that come into play. Some industries have some unique tax issues. Um, Most people have some general knowledge of this, and if not, it's easy to learn about it, but it's another thing you'll have to take some time to understand. And the Internal Revenue Service at the federal level and the state Department of Revenue are places where you'll need to learn more and do some research to make sure that you are appropriately doing the tax side of the business. Another side of this, and often very interconnected there, but is also around independent contractors and employees. And it's really important that you understand the differences between independent contractors, employees, and make the right decision for your business. This is one of those areas where you can get in trouble, and the government can be rather aggressive on these issues. And one of the things sometimes people think, well, if I make a contract and call someone an independent contractor, that's going to solve the problem. And I have to say that the IRS doesn't believe that that is the case. And if they think that you've misclassified someone, they're going to say, we don't care what's in writing from your perspective. It's the way we see the relationship. So you need to be careful about that and just understand what the risks are for you and how you're going to address that as an owner. If you do hire employees, 2 documents that you will need for each of your employees are an I-9 form, has to do with whether someone's eligible to work in the United States, and the W-4 form, which is the form that tells the employer how much to withhold from the person's paycheck to send that in. And so, just some stuff you'll have to learn about there. Next slide. You probably will need to have some kind of a permit or a license. Most municipalities, so if you're located in the municipality, will want you to have a business license. But again, you'll need to check with your municipality, and it's possible if you're not in a formal municipality, then maybe there are some things that maybe you don't need to do or need to. Then you would probably talk to your county. The state may also have licenses or permits depending on certain industries. Um, Certainly, anything that's in the medical field or industries where people could get significantly hurt, engineers, architects, Um, the state of Illinois has licensing around people who do hair and cosmetology, things like that. So again, being aware and doing some research on that is important to do. And then um, you probably do want insurance. We've talked about the advantages of having insurance and how it can limit risk. You should definitely find out. Pre-COVID, I often had insurance conversations with someone who's going to rent office space, and up until that point, they'd said, "Well, we're willing to take the risk." But certainly, in most cases, if you're going to rent office space, you'll have to have insurance. It will be mandated as part of that lease agreement. And also for employees, there is some insurance that you're required to have and some that you'll want to have. So you'll need to do some work on that. Next slide, please. So those are things that I think you need to do before you start to market and sell your products. If you're marketing and selling things at this time, I would encourage you to go back and look at the list and see if there's anything you've skipped. Hopefully, your business plan has helped you address some of these steps. And a big part of the planning process is like identifying what type of license I need, whether that be a state license, maybe for a specific industry, or whether my municipality requires that I have a specific license. And then please take time to really understand your finances and use that information to manage and grow your business. Um, I've met many entrepreneurs who spend a lot of time on this. I've met many entrepreneurs who don't. And often, again, there's no guarantees of success or failure. But in general, I can say that people who take the time to really study their finances and dig into it tend to be more successful. Again, it's not a guarantee, but it tends to happen. So, next slide. So, we are running out of time, so I'm going to go through some common questions real quick. Next slide. Oh, one, I hope you're learning something. If you're learning something, put a Y in the chat function. Let's go to the next slide here. So, do you need a written business plan? Well, I'll be honest, I don't think there's any police out there who are going to say that you have to have a business plan. But again, I think that people who tend to be more successful who take the time to have a written business plan. And we've all faced the disgruntled customer. We've all had that pressure of, I've got too much to do today. And a business plan is really a way to help us step back every once in a while and think about what is the main focus? What are we really trying to accomplish here? And I'll just throw out there, just so you kind of get a perspective. Um, Typically, a good business plan length tends to be around 10 to 20 pages. Sometimes they're a little bit longer, sometimes a little bit shorter, but certainly when someone gives me a one-page plan, it normally isn't long enough. And a number of years ago, I had someone give me a 125-page plan, and boy, I don't know if I actually did read the whole thing. I certainly tried, but you don't want it to be so long that the reader falls asleep. But that's just an idea about business plans. Next slide. How much money do you need to launch? Sometimes people think, well, I need a lot of money or I don't need very much money. So there was a stat based in some data that was collected in 2018 of the Inc. 5000, which is a list that's put together by the Inc. magazine of CEOs of fastest growing companies. And 42% of them said that they had started their business with less than 5,000, and an additional 21% said they started with less than 25,000. So, we can say that, two-thirds of businesses start with less than 25,000. But what I would really encourage you is you need to have a solid number. Now, I know that there'll be some flexibility in that, but as someone who used to represent a lender, the worst thing well, not the worst thing, but the second worst thing that you can say to a lender is, how much money can you lend me? And often what that means is, I don't know how much I need, and so I'll take anything you can give me. And so I always think that you want to have an exact number and be able to go into those conversations confidently that you know what you need. Some sources of capital, a survey from a couple of years ago suggested that about 64% of businesses use personal and family savings to get started. Only about 18% get business loans from banks. Loans from banks or other types of lenders are difficult, not impossible, but probably that's a smaller number than you would have expected. Certainly, I would have thought that the number was higher, although I've worked with enough clients to know that it's a tough slog to get through. And a lot of people do use personal credit cards. Uh, Certainly encourage you to be very careful about that and understand the cost and the implications of that, because that can be very expensive capital. Next slide. Some people often ask about angel and venture capital. Um, I'll just throw out there that I think for most businesses, angel and venture capital are not a valid option. There was another study a couple years ago that said that less than 1% of businesses got money from angels, and less than 0.05% got money from venture capital. The reality is they're both looking for very, very large returns. Um, Angels typically want at least a 10x return, not a 10% return, but a 10x. So if they invest $10,000, they're expecting to get $100,000 back. And venture capitalists typically, if they invest, they want 20 or 30x returns. So they're, for every thousand, they're looking for 20 or 30 back. So they have very high expectations. Certainly, there's a market for those businesses, and we all are aware of some of those, but it is a very competitive thing. And for a lot of people, it's probably not a good focus. Next slide. So next steps as we wrap up here, I would really encourage you as you finish today that you take some time and write down 3 next steps. What are the 3 things you're going to do based on having heard this conversation? And put dates by them, because having a date of when you're going to do it really adds some value. A consultant out of Australia made this comment: the simple act of writing down a goal and making a written plan for its accomplishment moves you into the top 3%. And certainly, I've seen and felt in my own life a lot of success when writing things down. So one of the things that you might put on your list is I'm doing a longer series of workshops. It's 4 2-hour workshops starting next Tuesday, and there'll be a link in the chat for you to register. Members of the University of Illinois community can register for free using the code there, VS4UIC. And so I'd certainly be happy to share more information about starting a business if that is something you're interested in. Next. A couple other resources. Do you want me to do this, Andrea?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So the Small Business Administration has some good resources. I would encourage you, if you go to learn.sba.gov. Also, they do have district offices in Chicago and Springfield. If you're in the Chicagoland area, Chai Biz Hub is a great resource for all kinds of entrepreneurial information and resources, and they connect people to people with specialized skills, and also in different neighborhoods in the city. And then at the different universities, in Urbana, there's the Illinois Entrepreneurship Program. In Springfield, the Center for Entrepreneurship. And then in Chicago, my program, the Entrepreneurial Support Program, and some other resources. So if you have questions, please reach out to us.
Thank you again, Steve, for all of your hard work. And thank you for all the attendees for sticking with us. I know we're running against the wire, but again, we're recording this. If you need to leave, we will send the recording to anyone that registered in the next few days or early next week. We just want to summarize a few things that we talked about. Entrepreneurship is part of our economy. Personal finances can absolutely impact business finances. So, having your personal finances in place and understanding them is a very good step to helping your business finances. We discussed that entrepreneurs have many different characteristics, and we want to emphasize that it's really important to be self aware, to know your habits, and that can impact how you manage your business. How knowing yourself and your habits will help you be a more successful business owner. Um, Steve shared his checklist with us that can help you think about what your business can look like, how to improve an existing business, and what to think about if you are looking to establish your business. You can also look at the resources that we've provided in the chat to support your entrepreneurial journey, and we will also make those available when I send the recording for this event as well. Our next webinar is again in 2 weeks, called Build Credit to Your Advantage. I saw someone ask, to how to learn more about credit, well, Kathy and Kamaya are going to tell us in 2 weeks how to build credit to your advantage. So that would be a good webinar to attend. You can also watch previous webinars, which we have on lots of different personal finance topics, including credit, investing, savings, all kinds of stuff on our YouTube channel. And you can stay in contact with us in lots of different ways. And we will stay on to answer some questions. I saw a few questions roll in. Kathy, how do you think we should prioritize answering these questions?
I just have I only have a couple here that haven't been
Okay.
answered, so I think we can just kind of take them. If I missed them, then people please feel free to rewrite your questions, but I think these are the main ones. One is a kind of a big question, and that is, how do you know if you're wasting your time with your business rather than, should you keep continuing it, knowing that it could be have a slow startup? But sometimes you just don't know if you have a good business or not. So, how do you tell the difference in whether you should hang in there or wrap it up?
So I think there are two things that I would encourage is one, you want to have some advisors who you can talk to and get advice from other people. Sometimes people are very scared, oh, somebody will steal my idea. Well, ideas are a dime a dozen. Execution is the most important thing. So I don't think you should stand on the rooftop and shout your ideas to everybody in the world. But I also don't think you should be so scared to share it with people who you trust and feel can help you and give you advice on it. And so I would encourage you to talk to people who have different experiences, hopefully who have some business experience, who can give you some insight into whether it makes sense, whether it seems like it's working. Then the other thing is, I think you have to decide what your expectation is and what do you need. And part of that, part of the knowing yourself is what kind of revenue do you need? What kind of income do you need to generate from this business? And at times, some of those discussions are difficult. Some of those things are hard to think about, but you have to decide, is this have the potential and how long can I wait for that to happen? Um, if you're not seeing a way to generate profit and to make this generate the level of profit that you were hoping for, at some point you're going to have to pull the plug, but you will have to make that decision yourself. But having, come up with a plan for when you think that is and talking to other people, I think will help you through those decisions.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. There's another one that's a more concrete question and very interesting. Where can you find local rental costs for office space or warehouse space? Looking for the data, that's based on zip
Mhm.
codes to kind of help out with the budgeting process.
So I think that the only way to solve that problem is to actually meet with real estate people and ask them. And I know that real estate is a tough business and real estate people sometimes can be a little difficult to deal with because if they don't see a return quickly, they can be a little hesitant or unwilling to talk. But real estate really is a local issue. And um, I think you just have to start calling real estate people and um, telling them the appropriate amount of information and what you're trying to find out. Um, also, um, I don't think that I would ever rent commercial real estate without using a real estate agent because there are nuances and there are things that they can help you with that would be very hard for someone who hasn't done it before to be aware of. And so, a big issue is a lot of times a landlord will offer to either provide some compensation or to do some repairs to the facility at their expense. Understanding that and knowing what's right about that partially is going to depend again on what's normal in the area. And also dealing with, if you were dealing with a landlord, there's kind of this um, thought that there are some landlords that don't understand what's going on, and so an agent who is doing other stuff can say, hey, that's not reasonable, or that's something that everybody else is providing to their tenants, so you need to step it up and provide that. So that's one area. Definitely you just got to ask questions. I don't know of any significant information about that that you can just look up online or something.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm call out there for other questions. Those are the two that I picked up. If anybody has any that I missed, please put them in the chat. Andrea, anything you wanted to add to any of those comments?
Well, I think that Steve is our subject matter expert, and he did an excellent job answering those questions. I really wouldn't have known where to start on those questions anyway.
Okay, somebody just popped into the chat. What if you don't have the support of family or friends and you're trying to move forward?
That's a tough situation, and I do hear that. I think that one of the things about entrepreneurship is understanding how challenging it will be. Um, and I wish I could give you a solution for that. I think, again, talking to other people who have experience in business and at least making sure that the idea sounds logical to them. Um, this is probably a scary thing, and I'm always scared to say this, but I had a business college professor once say to me, if you can't put together a financial model on Excel in 3 hours, the business won't be successful. Now, I know that there are a lot of people out there who Excel would be terrifying, but if you can't sit down and work with somebody to come up with some financial projections and feel like it can make it work in a short period, there are always going to be nuances. But making sure that the idea really is viable is a super important part of the process. And there are organizations, there are most universities have, especially that have a business program, have people that support entrepreneurs. Reach out to the local colleges. The Small Business Administration supports a program called the Small Business Development Centers. There are advisors in most parts of the United States who can help with your business. So I think that in most places there are resources. I do think having family support is a big thing, but I also know that for some people that's not a possibility. And so make wise decisions and look for resources in any place you can find them.
Yeah, and I wondered if somebody could pop the Small Business Administration contact information back into the website, because I was thinking sometimes they do have people that are mentoring through there that might be able to help out, or they, like you said earlier, they have great resources on their website too. Um, One follow-up question about how to study the your target market if you don't know them personally. It's a tough question.
Yeah. Um, it's always wise. It's challenging, but to try to talk to people who would actually use your product or service. And I always think that starting with something very simple, does this idea make sense to you? What is the pain? What is the problem with the existing solutions out there in the market? That's a simple question that you can ask. Um, the more customers you can talk to, and sometimes it's called customer discovery, the better informed you will be, the more you'll understand. A quote that I use in my longer series is customers buy for their own reasons. And it's really important that we become very knowledgeable about what is the pain that someone's going through and how our product or service can address that pain. And so asking people. There's lots of demographic information once you have some basic ideas, but it's still really important to ask people and get their feedback. Understand what they're paying for the product or service, what challenges they find with it, and ways they can make it better. Now, just because someone tells you something doesn't mean that you can always do it, but a big point is understanding what that pain is that they're suffering that they could address in a different way.
I think one thing to add there is if you're talking about a target market kind of with customers explicitly, understanding the industry that your product or service sits within is also very helpful. And there's a lot, at least in the United States, a lot of data on industries, right? Like how big is this industry? How many businesses might be in this industry? You can do Google searches on how many businesses exist in a specific state or region in that industry and what kinds of things that they provide as far
Mhm.
as similar products or services that you're trying to sell. So that's another way to approach kind of like looking at your target market.
And so the way that data is often identified is in a system called NAICS or SIC. NAICS stands for North American Industrial Classification System, and SIC stands for Standard Industrial Codes, I believe. And these are two ways that industries are identified and data is collected on them. And certainly, if you're a student at one of the universities, your library probably has access to some information related to that. At UIC, I believe it's called Dun and Bradstreet's. Man, it's skipping my mind right now. But if you said to a librarian you're trying to find information on NAICS codes or SIC codes, they should be aware of that. And certainly, you can always reach out to me, and I'd be glad to talk to you. Um, Libraries often, especially at research institutions, have access to a tool called iBizWorld, and iBizWorld is a large international research company, and they have information on lots of industries. Now, I will say that there are some industries that don't have NAICS codes or SIC codes, um, especially new industries that are not so common. So years ago, I was all excited. I had someone ask me for some information. They were in the personal organizing field, and we discovered that actually the field was too new for the NAICS organization to come up with a specific code. So then in that case, then there's not a lot of good information. But a lot of other companies there or types of fields, there is NAIC or SIC codes. And when someone files their taxes for a business, they have to include the NAICS code. The taxing agency, the IRS, doesn't actually call it that. They just call it a business industry code, I believe, but it actually is what's called a NAICS code.
Okay, I think maybe we can take one more question. And the last one is, do you think a business degree actually helps with running a business?
Boy, that's a tough one for someone who works for an academic institution. Um, I think there are a couple things. I think that the more you understand just about general business operations and general concepts, the more you'll be able to communicate with other business people and be aware of the standard stuff that everybody needs to deal with. But certainly experience in whatever industry you are going to go into is super important. And often I've worked with entrepreneurs who couldn't get financing because they didn't have experience. And often I think that if you want to go into an industry, if you don't know that industry, if you haven't worked in it for a number of years, as challenging as it might be, you might be best served by getting an entry level job in that industry and maybe spending a year or two or three there to work your way up and learn really what goes on in that industry and how it's managed. Probably the sales process is not going to be real complicated for most businesses. I mean, certainly there are some types of businesses that it is, but really understanding how decisions are made, how things are organized in a way that's effective. Um, those are the kind of things that you really do need to have industry knowledge of. And it's discouraging for me to say, hey, you need to do this. But the reality is I would much rather work with an entrepreneur who has even a year's worth of experience in the industry they want to go in than someone who's never been there. And yes, you can learn a lot by frequenting the business. If you want to if you want to run a restaurant, you should definitely go see how restaurants run. But there's nothing like having been in the back of that business, having talked to owners, having talked to suppliers, and understand what goes on there. So I think it's a combination. I don't think that you should feel that if you don't have a business degree, you can't be an entrepreneur. There are lots of entrepreneurs who've been successful without a business degree, but there are also a lot of entrepreneurs who have learned a lot and who find that really valuable.
Thank you, Steve. I think we could probably answer questions all afternoon, but in the interest of time and to let everybody leave that wants to leave, go have lunch. We're going to wrap up the recording. If you do have questions, you can email studentmoney@uillinois.edu, and we can either forward them to Steve if it is appropriate from an entrepreneurship perspective, or we can try to get you an answer ourselves through the Student Money Management Center. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for asking fabulous questions and being active in the chat. And we would love for you to have a fabulous day.